This is a debrief of day 39 of my GMAT Prep. Today is the last day on which I'm going to focus primarily on preparing for the GMAT verbal section. Starting tomorrow, I will transition into the last phase of my GMAT Prep in the lead up to my final GMAT exam, which I plan to take in 7 to 10 days. I call this final phase the Test Rehearsals phase. I will start this video by sharing some thoughts on the Test Rehearsals phase. Then I will share my takeaways from 2 critical reasoning practice sets which mark the closure of my preparation for GMAT Verbal. So let's talk about the Test Rehearsals phase. One of the things I very much recommend you to do is to take a leave from work in the week or so before your final GMAT exam so that you can focus all your attention and energy on the GMAT alone. Remove all distractions. Don't think about meetings, projects, commute, parties, hanging out with friends, and whatever else is part of normal life for you for about 7 days. Double down on the GMAT instead. That focus will help you assimilate everything you have learned from weeks of practice which you have put in before this phase. There are 3 things you should be doing during the last 7 to 10 days of your GMAT prep. First, practice more. For this, we will rely on all the remaining official practice materials you can find. Second, revisit everything that you struggled with in the preceding days of your prep. This includes questions which you answered incorrectly in the preceding weeks of your GMAT prep and questions which you simply bookmarked because you learned something important from answering them. Third, rehearse taking the GMAT exam. This is about taking the official GMAT practice exams in exam-like conditions. Let me touch upon the first 2 things in context of my GMAT prep. I want to begin by taking quick stock of how many questions I have left unattempted from the GMAT official prep materials and how many questions I need to revisit because I answered them incorrectly the first time around. Looking at the quant review, I have about 70 questions left. From the data insights review, I have about 150 questions remaining. I have exhausted most of the data sufficiency questions, so most of these 150 questions correspond to the other question types from the data insights section. Finally, I have not yet started going through the verbal review yet, so I have all 230 questions left from there. These are a mix of critical reasoning and reading comprehension question types. Talking about questions which I need to revisit, I am done with attempting all questions from the GMAT official guide at least once. There are some questions which I bookmarked because I did not answer them right the first time around. The count of such questions should be easy to get if you use the online question bank for your preparation. In my case, I don't have an accurate count for those questions because I was using the physical official guide for my quant and data sufficiency preparation. The number 41 you're seeing on the screen corresponds to the verbal and data insights questions only. So overall, I expect the total number of questions in this category to be in the ballpark of 50 to 60 questions in total. In total, we are talking about 500 questions. This is more than enough material to keep me occupied through the next 3 to 4 days. Note that you don't need to use up all the materials before your GMAT exam. If you feel that you are already comfortable on a given section, it is perfectly alright to leave some of these questions be. If you have watched my video from day 11 of my GMAT prep when I was making and describing my study plan, you already know that one of the distinctive features of the test rehearsals phase is that you can start spending equal amounts of time across the 3 sections of the GMAT in this phase. That said, you should give yourself the flexibility to prioritize working on your weaker areas if necessary. One thing which is very important in this phase is that you should mix practice sets across different sections so that you get used to the mental shifts which you will need to make between sections as you're taking the GMAT. In my case, I'm going to spend the initial days of this phase on practicing data insights and verbal questions. That aligns well with the number of unattempted questions I have left from each section. Now let's talk about the third piece, which is about actually rehearsing for your final GMAT exam. This corresponds to the final 6 to 7 days of this phase. You want to make the days leading up to your final GMAT exam look more and more like the day of your final GMAT exam. Plan to take a practice exam every day. If you have time and energy left, you can squeeze in 2 practice exams in a day also. Manage details such as the time when you wake up, the time of day when you take your practice exam, and even the food you eat. In other words, follow as strict of a routine as you can. And don't forget to practice on an appropriate whiteboard or scratch pad depending on whether you plan to take the test from home or at a test center. In fact, if you're taking the exam at a test center, I even recommend mapping out your commute to the test center and taking that commute once before the day of the exam so you know where to find the test center. It is not a necessary step, but it all comes down to your personality. If you're someone who gets anxious about exams, doing these things will help you have some predictability on the day of your final GMAT exam and reduce the number of unknown variables which can trigger anxiety. Note also that these are small details which might not boost your GMAT score, but if you get them wrong, they can definitely pull your score down. For example, if you end up eating a meal that results in your sugar levels dropping right before the exam, that's an irreversible mistake you will not be able to correct. You are better off determining what you want to eat on the day of the exam and then making it a part of the routine at least for a couple days before your final exam to see how it affects your performance. One last call out for you. I have mentioned this in some of my earlier videos as well. In my case, the final week of my GMAT preparation is coinciding with a major medical event in my family. One of my family members is undergoing a double jaw surgery and I am their primary caretaker. It is a 7-hour long surgery, no joke, and will take place in a city different from where I live. What that means is that I will not have access to my study room, and as a result, the remaining videos you will see in this series will be shot in a retrospective format. What that means is that I will continue with my GMAT prep off camera and then share my performance and takeaways with you separate from that. The good thing is that by this point, I have already covered all the content which required you to have a view into what I was doing in my scratchpad. The remaining videos in this series will focus more on what my day-to-day performance on various practice sets and practice exams looks like and how I am preparing psychologically for the final GMAT exam. With that said, let me finally transition into sharing my performance and learnings from 2 critical reasoning practice sets I attempted today. The first critical reasoning practice set took me 49 minutes, during which I answered 23 questions. Of those 23 questions, 9 were easy, 8 were medium, and 6 were hard. As you can see, the mix of difficulty levels on the set was skewed towards questions rated as being easy by the GMAT. I answered 22 of these 23 questions correctly. The one question which I answered incorrectly was rated as easy, and it was question number 3 on the practice set. Interestingly, I answered all the 14 medium and hard questions correctly, but made a mistake on an easy question. If you notice my scratch work on this question, you can see that even when I was attempting it the first time around, I had to solve it twice. On the first attempt, I ended up rejecting all the answer options. Hence, I had to solve it again. That's also why this question took me 5 minutes to answer. Despite working through this problem 2 times, I answered it incorrectly. When I revisited this question after I was done with the practice set, I realized that I had made a linguistic miss on this one. The right way to approach this question would have been to translate some of the words into mathematical equations, but because I was blind to a particular set of words, I did not do that at all. Unfortunately, that was the reason why I ended up answering this question incorrectly. Addressing mistakes like this requires you to be very self-aware and constantly check for shortcuts you might be taking or assumptions you might be making while reading verbal questions. It will not help if you are cognitively tired from other things you have been doing that day. The best way to solve this issue is to schedule your GMAT preparation and your GMAT test at a time of day when you think you are in your most alert mental state. The second critical reasoning practice set I attempted on this day took me about 40 minutes to complete. I answered 25 questions in that time frame. One thing which should immediately jump out at you based on those numbers alone is the unusual boost in my velocity. Across all the other critical reasoning practice sets, I have been taking between 2 and 2.5 minutes per critical reasoning question. On this practice set, I took an average of 1.5 minutes per question. So clearly, it appears I was pushing hard on velocity. What do you think would have happened to my accuracy? As you might expect, my accuracy dropped precipitously. I was only able to get 18 out of 25 questions right on this practice set. That is 7 mistakes in total. This practice set was quite balanced on the difficulty levels of questions. It contained 8 easy, 8 medium, and 9 hard questions. If you look at my scratch pad, I have highlighted the questions I answered incorrectly with red boxes. You can see that my mistakes are scattered throughout the entire practice set. I made mistakes on 3 easy, 1 medium and 3 hard questions, so the mistakes were also spread across questions of different difficulty levels. Let's also look at the question by question metrics. You can see that I went through questions pretty quickly on this practice set. Except for a couple exceptions, I solved most of them in under 2 minutes. If I focus only on the questions I answered incorrectly, you can notice once again that several of these questions were answered in well under 2 minutes. Without even conducting a deeper performance analysis on this practice set, there are 2 key learnings one can take away. First, I need to pace myself better. Pacing on the GMAT is not just about accelerating when needed, but also decelerating when appropriate so that your journey through a set of questions is deliberate and controlled. Second, you need to manage your mental state with a high degree of self-awareness when taking the GMAT. Feeling rushed, impatient, tired or unfocused are not good for your GMAT performance. Coming back to the practice set, I'm going to skip a deeper performance analysis of the questions I answered incorrectly because the driving reason for the drop in my accuracy came down to 2 things. 1, pushing too hard on velocity and getting impatient. And 2, just not being in a focused and alert state of mind. I will just bookmark the questions which I answered incorrectly on this practice set and return to them a few days from now. One key thing I want to call out is that if you experience a sudden drop in score like this on your practice sets, closer to your final GMAT exam, don't start panicking. Assess what happened and confirm if it was because of a one-off factor or not. The key is that you need to identify what went wrong so that you can anticipate and circumvent that issue on your final GMAT exam. In my case, what gave me comfort is looking at my accuracy trend with critical reasoning questions on the previous practice sets I have attempted. With all the critical reasoning practice sets which I have attempted till date, my accuracy levels have generally been at 90% or better. That's a signal that the drop in accuracy on this practice set is likely just a one-off. So that is all for this video. If you have any questions, click on the Ask Me Anything link in the video description. Hit like, subscribe and bell because that is a YouTube ritual. Put something cheerful in the comments so I can like it or something mean and useless so I can ignore it. I will catch you in the next video.